The first night after the divorce was the quietest night of my life. The walls, once echoing with arguments, laughter, and unspoken tension, now stood still, almost as if they, too, were tired. I sat in the same living room where she used to hum her favorite song while making coffee. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered on the couch, like a ghost refusing to leave. I told myself I was free, but the silence didn't sound like freedom. It sounded like loss. Yet, somewhere beneath that silence, something inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of healing. For months, we had lived together as strangers. We shared meals without sharing words, we exchanged glances without meaning, and we smiled for photographs that no longer told the truth. I used to think that if I tried harder, if I said less or gave more, maybe things would go back to how they used to be. But sometimes love isn't lost in one big fight, it fades quietly, like the last echo of a song you don't realize has ended. I kept replaying memories of us laughing under the rain, cooking together, or just sitting in silence that used to feel safe. But that night, the silence was different. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was empty, and for the first time, I faced that emptiness instead of running from it. I thought about how we both had slowly built invisible walls between us. At first, they were small, a few unsaid words, a few moments of pride, a few disappointments we swept under the rug. But over time, those walls grew taller, thicker, and colder. We stopped reaching over them. The distance became normal. And when normal starts to hurt less than love, that's when you know it's over. I had been afraid of that realization. Afraid that accepting it meant I had failed. But sitting alone that night, I realized that failure wasn't walking away. It was pretending that staying broken was strength. I looked around the empty room and noticed the framed photos still hanging on the wall, moments frozen in time when we both believed in forever. Her smile in those pictures wasn't fake, it was real once. So was mine. I wondered where that version of us went, and when we stopped fighting for it. Maybe healing doesn't start when you stop hurting, maybe it begins when you finally stop lying to yourself. I took down one of the pictures, the one from our honeymoon, and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't out of anger. It was out of acceptance. I no longer needed to keep reminding myself of what was lost. I needed to remember what I had learned. The silence that night wasn't just the absence of her voice, it was the presence of my own. For years, I had silenced my emotions, buried my needs, and pretended that love meant sacrifice without boundaries. But that evening, I spoke to myself quietly but honestly. I admitted that I was exhausted. That I had been holding on to an idea of love that had long stopped existing. I wasn't the same person she married, and she wasn't the same woman I fell for. We had grown apart, but we kept forcing our broken pieces to fit. And when they didn't, we blamed each other for the pain they caused. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the balcony, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. It felt strange to see the world moving on so effortlessly while I was sitting there, feeling the weight of every memory. But in that stillness, I felt something shift. There was no anger, no bitterness, just quiet acknowledgement. I began to understand that maybe she was meant to be part of my growth, not my forever. Maybe her chapter in my life was meant to teach me what love is and what it isn't. For the first time, I didn't try to fill the silence with music or distraction. I let it stay. I let it echo through me until it stopped feeling like punishment and started sounding like peace. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a slow exhale after years of holding your breath. I realized that healing isn't something that happens suddenly. It's a slow, uneven journey through the quiet. It's learning to live again, not as someone's partner, but as yourself. And that night, amid the heavy silence, I took the first small, uncertain step toward being whole again. Love is a strange thing. It begins like fire, bright, warm, and full of life, but sometimes it fades into smoke before you realize it's gone. I used to believe love meant never giving up, that holding on tighter could fix what was falling apart. I fought for us long after the laughter disappeared, convincing myself that love was about endurance, about proving loyalty even when it hurt. But somewhere along the way, I learned that love isn't about holding on until it breaks, it's about knowing when to let go with grace. Sometimes love means giving the other person the freedom to find their own peace, even if it means you have to lose them to find yours. When she told me she wanted a divorce, I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just sat there, feeling the weight of every word fall between us like heavy rain. Her eyes weren't filled with anger. They were calm, almost tired. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't leaving because she stopped caring. She was leaving because she was exhausted from trying to make something work that no longer existed. That realization hurt more than anything. I wanted to hate her for walking away, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew I had been walking away too, just more slowly. For years, we both mistook silence for peace. We thought avoiding hard conversations was love. We thought staying together, no matter how unhappy we were, was a sign of strength. But love without honesty isn't love at all, it's survival. I had spent so long trying to keep her close that I forgot what it felt like to be close to myself. I stopped noticing the little things that used to matter. Her favorite song would play on the radio, and I'd change the station just to avoid the ache. She'd cook dinner, and I'd compliment her without tasting the food. We both became actors in a story we no longer believed in. Letting go wasn't easy. It never is. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you'll fall either way. The difference is whether you fall in fear or fall in faith that you'll survive the landing. The day she packed her things, I watched quietly. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't try to remind her of the good times, because even those memories had started to feel heavy. Instead, I helped her carry a few boxes to the car. It wasn't out of indifference, it was out of love, the kind that no longer clings, the kind that understands that peace sometimes looks like goodbye. In the days that followed, I kept replaying the moments that led us here. The late nights, the small arguments that grew into walls, the apologies that lost their meaning over time. But amidst that reflection, a strange calm settled in. I realized that maybe love isn't measured by how long two people stay together, but by how much they grow from being with each other. She taught me patience, compassion, and the value of honesty, even if that honesty meant admitting we were done. That's the part no one tells you about real love. It's not always about forever. Sometimes it's about understanding that forever can live in the lessons, not the relationship. There were mornings I woke up missing her, not because I wanted her back, but because my life had been built around her presence. Her absence felt like silence after a long, familiar song. But gradually, that silence stopped feeling lonely. It began to feel peaceful. I could hear my own thoughts again, dream without guilt, breathe without waiting for someone else's approval. I started doing small things for myself, things I had stopped doing because they didn't fit into us. I took long walks, read books, even learned to cook. It felt strange at first, like rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. I began to understand that letting go wasn't an act of defeat. It was an act of love in its purest form, love that respects both souls enough to release them from what no longer serves them. It's easy to hold on out of fear, fear of loneliness, fear of regret, fear of starting over. But sometimes, the real strength lies in the softness of surrender, in the courage to say, "We tried, and that's enough." I used to think that walking away meant I stopped caring. Now I know it means I cared enough to stop causing pain. Love, I've learned, isn't about possession, it's about appreciation. It's about cherishing what you had, forgiving what you lost, and wishing the other person peace even when they're no longer beside you. She was happy after the divorce, and maybe that happiness was her healing. But mine began the moment I understood that love doesn't end when two people part, it transforms. It becomes gratitude for the moments that were real, lessons for the moments that weren't, and hope for the ones still to come. Pain has a way of breaking you in silence before it teaches you how to stand again. When she left, I thought I had lost everything. The home we built together felt empty, my reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, and every corner of my life felt like it had been ripped apart. I spent days wondering how someone could walk away from years of love as if it were a dream they'd simply woken up from. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think beyond the echo of her voice. But pain, as cruel as it is, has its own purpose. It strips you down, removes your illusions, and shows you what truly lives inside your soul when everything else is gone. At first, I fought against the pain. I drowned it with distractions, tried to bury it under fake smiles and busy days. I told myself I was fine, that I was strong, that I didn't need her. But the truth is, you can't heal what you refuse to feel. Every night, when the world went quiet, I could hear my heart breaking again, piece by piece. There's a kind of loneliness that words can't describe, the kind that comes when the person who once knew you best becomes a stranger. That kind of pain doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It reshapes how you see love, trust, and even yourself. There came a night when I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by the fragments of what used to be our life together, photos, notes, memories that refused to fade. I wanted to throw them away, but I couldn't. Each one was a piece of a story I didn't regret living, no matter how it ended. I cried, not out of weakness, but out of release. The tears were not for her leaving, they were for the version of me that had forgotten how to live without her. Pain was my only companion that night, but for the first time, I didn't run from it. I listened. In the stillness of that moment, I realized something. Pain doesn't come to destroy you, it comes to cleanse you. It removes the illusions you held on to, the expectations that blinded you, the fears that kept you chained to things that no longer served your soul. It hurts because it's digging deep into the roots of who you are, pulling out everything false and fragile. And though it leaves scars, those scars eventually remind you of your strength. I started to understand that the same heart that broke in love could also heal in love, this time, love for myself. Day by day, I began to rebuild. Slowly, almost unnoticeably. I started doing small things that reminded me of life's beauty, a walk in the park, a sunrise, a cup of coffee in silence. I began to realize that peace doesn't arrive suddenly, it grows quietly through the cracks that pain leaves behind. Each morning I woke up and chose to keep going, even when it still hurt. That was strength, not the loud kind that others see, but the quiet kind that no one applauds. Strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the ability to carry it with grace until it loses its power over you. There were days when the memories came back stronger than ever. I would hear a song we used to love or pass by a place we once visited, and for a moment, it felt like reopening a wound. But I learned to let those feelings flow without resistance. I stopped labeling them as weakness. Because every time I faced the pain instead of avoiding it, I took back a little more control over my heart. The pain began to teach me not to hate what I lost, but to value what I had, to be grateful for the lessons, and to recognize that even heartbreak can be sacred when it leads to self-discovery. I began to see the strength in forgiveness, too, not for her, but for myself. For the mistakes I made, for the blind love I gave, for the parts of me that didn't know better. Forgiving myself didn't erase the past, but it set me free from reliving it. And that freedom was where strength truly began. I realized that healing wasn't about becoming who I was before the pain, it was about becoming someone wiser because of it. In time, I stopped seeing myself as a victim of heartbreak and started seeing myself as a survivor of growth. The pain that once drowned me became the foundation I stood on. It made me patient, empathetic, and more real. It showed me that love isn't meant to complete you, it's meant to reveal you, to show you where you're strong, where you're fragile, and where you still need to grow. What once felt like an ending was, in truth, the beginning of a deeper understanding of myself. Time is the one thing that doesn't rush to heal you. It moves at its own pace, quietly, steadily, and often painfully slow. In the beginning, every hour felt like a lifetime. The mornings were heavy, the nights endless, and the memories in between were like sharp edges I couldn't avoid. I used to believe that time alone would erase the hurt, but I learned that time doesn't heal by forgetting, it heals by revealing. It shows you truths that emotions once blinded you from. It doesn't take the pain away, it teaches you how to carry it differently. In the days after she left, I lived inside my memories. Every sound, every smell, every small detail reminded me of her. I would reach for my phone, almost texting her, before realizing that there was no longer anyone waiting on the other side. That realization broke me over and over again. But with each passing week, the pain started to feel less like a wound and more like a scar. It was still there, but it didn't bleed anymore. That's the quiet miracle of time. It doesn't ask for permission to heal you. It just does, slowly, quietly, beneath all the chaos. There was a moment months later when I caught myself smiling at something small, a joke on the radio, a warm breeze on my face, and for the first time, it wasn't followed by guilt. I had been afraid to feel happiness, as if moving on meant betraying what we had shared. But time softened that fear too. It helped me see that healing doesn't mean forgetting the love that once was. It means learning to live without it defining who you are. The laughter that used to be hers eventually became my own again. I began to notice how time changes your perspective on everything. The moments that once felt like disasters began to look like lessons. The words that used to hurt started to sound like truth. And the person I used to blame became someone I silently thanked. Because when the emotions finally settled, I saw things I couldn't before. I saw how we both made mistakes, how we both tried, how we both simply grew in different directions. Time gave me the distance to understand that love isn't always enough to keep two people together. Sometimes love's purpose is to guide you to who you're meant to be, not who you're meant to stay with. There were evenings when I'd sit alone, staring at the sky, thinking about how everything changes with time. The stars above looked the same, but I wasn't. I had started to rebuild myself without even realizing it. Little by little, the grief that once consumed me became a quiet part of my story. I stopped asking why it ended and started asking what it taught me. I learned patience, not just with others, but with myself. I learned that healing doesn't follow a timeline, and there's no finish line to cross. Some days you move forward, some days you fall back. But with every sunrise, you rise a little stronger. Time also taught me humility. I used to think I could control everything: love, happiness, destiny. But losing her showed me that life doesn't always follow your plans. Sometimes it breaks you just to rebuild you better. The waiting, the loneliness, the confusion, all of it became part of a process I didn't understand then but do now. Time is not cruel, it's honest. It gives you what you need, not what you want. It forces you to sit with your truth until you're strong enough to face it without fear. There came a day when I passed by her favorite cafe and didn't feel that familiar sting in my chest. I noticed it, but it didn't ache. That's how healing happens, not with grand moments, but in small, almost invisible ones. The pain doesn't vanish, it just becomes quieter, like an old song you once knew by heart but haven't heard in years. Time doesn't erase what happened, it simply teaches you how to live alongside it. The more I let time do its work, the more I began to see that everything that hurt me was shaping me into someone new. Someone who could appreciate peace more deeply because I had known chaos. Someone who could recognize love more clearly because I had seen it fade. The emptiness that once felt unbearable began to make room for understanding, compassion, and self-awareness. It was time that showed me love's true nature, not as possession or permanence, but as transformation. And slowly, the emotions that once ruled me began to settle. I could look back without bitterness, speak her name without trembling, remember our story without drowning in it. Time didn't erase the pain, but it revealed something more important, the person I became because of it. There are moments in life when pain turns into clarity, and clarity turns into purpose. I remember sitting alone one evening, staring at the fading sunset through my window, realizing that for the first time in months, I wasn't angry. The bitterness that once filled my heart had started to dissolve into something softer, something that felt like understanding. I had spent so long asking, why me, that I never stopped to ask, what now? That question changed everything. It was in that quiet, uncertain moment that pain began to transform into purpose. The same hurt that once felt unbearable became the fuel that pushed me to rebuild myself piece by piece. The truth is, every heartbreak carries a hidden invitation to grow, to see yourself without the person you depended on, to find meaning beyond the pain. At first, I couldn't see it. I thought the end of our marriage was the end of my story. But with time, I realized it was just the beginning of a new one. Every tear I shed, every lonely night I endured, was teaching me something. It was teaching me resilience, self-respect, and the importance of not losing myself in someone else's absence. Pain was not my punishment, it was my teacher. I started writing down my thoughts, just to clear the chaos inside me. Words became my therapy. I wrote about love, loss, forgiveness, and hope. The more I wrote, the more I understood myself. I wasn't trying to escape the pain anymore. I was learning to give it a voice. Through that process, I began to discover a strange kind of peace. I understood that everything I had gone through was shaping me into a different version of myself, one who was no longer afraid to be alone, one who could stand in silence without breaking. It was around that time I began to notice the small victories. The mornings when I woke up without feeling heavy. The days when I could laugh without pretending. The moments when I realized I no longer needed validation from someone else to feel worthy. That realization became a turning point. I began to pour my energy into things that mattered, my work, my passions, the people who truly cared about me. It wasn't about distraction. It was about redirection. I wasn't running from the pain anymore. I was walking through it, learning from it, and allowing it to give my life new meaning. I met people who told me their own stories of loss and heartbreak, and for the first time, I listened not just with empathy, but with understanding. I realized that pain connects us in ways happiness never can. It strips away our pride, our masks, our illusions, and leaves us raw enough to see each other's humanity. The purpose I found wasn't in forgetting what happened, but in using it to help others heal too. I began to speak about it openly, not as a victim of love lost, but as someone who had survived it and found wisdom within it. One night, as I sat in the same room that once echoed with silence, I felt a strange gratitude. The pain that once consumed me had now given me direction. I realized I was no longer searching for closure from her or from the past. My closure came from the understanding that everything that breaks you is also preparing you for something greater. The love that ended didn't leave me empty, it made room for a deeper love, one that came from within. I started seeing beauty in things I once ignored. The sound of rain tapping against the window, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way the world keeps moving no matter how still your pain feels. I understood that life doesn't stop for heartbreak, it simply waits for you to catch up. That awareness became my strength. I began to build a life that didn't depend on someone else's presence to feel meaningful. I worked harder, dreamed bigger, and loved deeper, not because I was trying to prove something, but because I had finally learned what love truly meant. Pain had introduced me to a version of myself I might never have met otherwise. The one who could find calm in chaos, hope in heartbreak, and purpose in loss. I used to think I needed her to complete my story, but I realized I only needed the lessons she left behind. The moments that once brought me to my knees became the foundation I stood on. The purpose I found wasn't something I discovered overnight, it was something I built from the ruins of what once was. And as I learned to live again, I understood that the pain that broke me was the same force that taught me how to rise. 2 days after the divorce, I received a call that would change everything. It was unexpected, short, and heavy with the kind of silence that tells you life is about to shift. I remember sitting there, phone in hand, my heart pounding as the words echoed through the line. Her voice wasn't there, but her name was. The moment I heard it, a strange mix of fear, confusion, and sadness washed over me. The woman I once shared everything with, the woman I thought I had let go of, was suddenly part of my world again, not by choice, but by fate's quiet design. I drove for hours that day, barely noticing the road. My mind was a blur of memories, emotions, and unanswered questions. I didn't know what to expect when I reached the hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit me first, then the cold echo of footsteps down the corridor. I asked for her room, and as I walked toward it, I felt something shift deep inside me. The anger I had carried for months vanished, replaced by something much heavier, compassion. There she was, lying quietly, her face pale, her eyes closed, fragile in a way I had never seen before. The same woman who once walked out of my life now lay in front of me, silent, vulnerable, human. For a long moment, I just stood there. So many emotions battled inside me: hurt, pity, regret, love, and something that felt like forgiveness. I had rehearsed so many things I wanted to say if I ever saw her again, but in that moment, none of them mattered. Life had its own way of teaching lessons, and this was mine. I sat beside her bed, watching her chest rise and fall slowly. I wanted to hate her for the pain she caused me, but I couldn't. All I could see was someone who was once my world, someone who had shared my dreams, my laughter, my failures. Whatever had gone wrong between us suddenly felt so small compared to the reality of seeing her like that. The nurses told me it wasn't serious, that she would recover with rest. Relief flooded through me, but it came with an ache I couldn't explain. I realized then how quickly everything can change, how one moment you think you've moved on, and the next, you're right back where it all began, reminded of what truly matters. Sitting there, holding her hand for the first time in months, I understood something that no words had ever made clear before. Love doesn't die with distance or even with separation. It transforms. It becomes quieter, softer, more understanding. It becomes the kind of love that doesn't demand, doesn't blame, doesn't expect, it just is. I stayed with her for hours, not saying much. The silence between us, once filled with anger, now felt peaceful. There was a strange comfort in being there, in knowing that despite everything, life had brought us back together in this fragile moment. It wasn't about rekindling what was lost, it was about acknowledging what had been real. Sometimes closure doesn't come through conversation or explanation, it comes through presence, through being there when life gives you one last chance to feel something deeper than pride. As I left the hospital that night, I looked up at the sky. It was quiet, just like the night she left me, but it felt different. The emptiness I used to fear was gone. I realized that maybe this was what healing truly looked like, not forgetting the past, but finally being able to face it without pain. Her being okay was enough for me. I didn't need apologies or promises. I just needed to know that despite everything we went through, the part of me that once loved her still wished her peace. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about how life works. How sometimes, the people who hurt us the most also teach us the most. How endings can circle back to moments of unexpected connection. How healing isn't a straight path, it bends, it twists, it surprises you. 2 days after the divorce, I thought I had closed a chapter for good. But standing by her side reminded me that life doesn't always care about our plans. It has its own timing, its own lessons, and sometimes it brings people back into our lives, not to stay, but to remind us of who we've become. That experience changed something in me. It reminded me of my own humanity, of the fragility that binds us all. It showed me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about releasing the weight of what it did to you. I didn't walk away from that hospital as her ex-husband or as the man she once loved. I walked away as someone who had finally found peace with the past, someone who understood that even in endings, there can be grace. When God becomes your joy, nothing can steal your peace because your heart is no longer tied to the unstable things of this world. When joy is rooted in God Himself, it cannot be shaken by loss, fear, or disappointment. The world offers happiness that depends on what we have, but God offers joy that depends on who He is. His love is constant, His promises are sure, and His presence never fades. When our hearts learn to delight in Him above all else, we begin to experience a peace that doesn't make sense to the world. It's the kind of peace that remains calm in the middle of chaos and still believes when everything seems uncertain. When God becomes our source of joy, we stop searching for it in people or possessions. We no longer chase temporary satisfaction because we have found eternal fulfillment in His presence. Every prayer, every moment of quiet surrender draws us deeper into that unshakable joy. Life may still bring storms, but those storms cannot drown the peace that God places within us. It is a peace that guards our minds from worry and our hearts from fear. It reminds us that no matter what changes around us, God remains the same. The more we learn to find joy in Him, the less power the world has over us. We begin to walk in freedom, knowing that our worth and happiness are no longer defined by what happens to us, but by who lives within us. This kind of joy turns ordinary days into sacred ones because God's presence becomes the center of everything. When He becomes our joy, we no longer live as victims of circumstance, but as children of a faithful Father who gives peace that passes understanding and joy that endures forever, but because of who is walking with us through it.